Okay, it is Tuesday, March 21st. We are in House General and Housing Committee and doing walkthrough of several bills. Not a walkthrough, but presentation by sponsoring members. And we are joined first by Representative Sims, H260, an act relating to the Commission on Native American Affairs. Welcome. And tell us.
Chair and committee, Representative Catherine Sims from Orleans 4, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all to talk about H260, an act relating to the Commission on Native American Affairs. So the purpose of this bill is to give more visibility and voice to our Abitibi community through updates to the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs statute and by appropriating $150,000 for that purpose. So the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, the VCNAA, is a 9-member commission reflecting the diversity of Native affiliations and geographic locations in the state. And those 9 members are appointed to serve on the commission by the governor. And the charge of the commission is really large. They're tasked with securing assistance for social services, education, employment opportunities, healthcare, and housing for Native Americans, developing and marketing Vermont Native American fine art and performing arts, craft work, and cultural events, and developing policies and programs to benefit the Vermont's Native American Indian population. And while the charge of the VCNAA is really significant, the only funding the VCNAA receives is the standard per diem through ACCD, which is approximately $2,700 per year, and some administrative support from ACCD for the commission's meetings. And we've heard from members of the Abitibi community that the limited compensation for commissioners is a real barrier for participation. The $50 a day doesn't even cover probably the gas to get to that day-long meeting. And so without staff or project funding, the work falls to volunteer members or isn't able to move forward because of a lack of capacity and resources. As this body has recognized with other commissions, like the Commission on Human Rights or the Commission on Women, staff capacity is really critical to ensuring that a commission can fulfill its statutory duties when they're as significant as the VCNAA's is. In fact, we even funded a commission on the 250th anniversary of colonizing Vermont for over $100,000. And in this case in particular, the legislative body has asked Native voices to be at the table to weigh in on policy and programs, but we haven't funded that capacity. And I think that's a structural issue that needs to be addressed. So in collaboration with the VCNAA and recognized tribes, we put forward H260, an act relating to the commission, which would do a couple of things. In part, it would, in addition to the existing duties of the commission, the bill would give the commission a number of new powers. Supporting conducting research and studying issues facing our Native community, advising and consulting the executive branch, the General Assembly, other state and local entities, and the public on services, programs, policies, and issues affecting the status of Native Americans in Vermont, publishing periodic reports, documenting the legal, economic, social, political status and other concerns of our Native community, educating state and local governmental entities and the public about issues affecting Native Americans in Vermont, facilitating communication across the community of Native Americans in Vermont, and hiring and maintaining an office and hiring an employee to carry out the duties, as well as seeking and hopefully receiving federal and other sources of funds to complement the work. So the bill seeks $150,000 appropriation, which would be used to increase the per diems of the 9 commissioners to $100 per member per meeting, providing project funding for educational initiatives, and funding 1 full-time administrator position at the commission. So why this request now? Racial and social justice, I think, are important priorities for our General Assembly. This request is an opportunity to build on work of previous sessions, much done by this committee, like the eugenics apology, free access to hunting and fishing rights, property tax exemptions for land owned by recognized tribes. And right now, the workload of the VCNA is increasing with growing awareness about the value of having input on key issues from diverse perspectives. I believe the commission has been asked to fill over 10 positions on other boards as a result of what we put into statute. So, when we set up a standing committee, we say, a member appointed by the VCNAA. And so they're getting a lot of requests to be present, which we want. We want that voice and perspective at the table. But there's a real limit in capacity to be able to do that. And so an increase in support for the VCNAA would increase the ability of our Indigenous community to participate in those efforts. We've asked for this input, and I think we should resource it. So appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this bill. I know you have a lot of requests on your plate. The reason that this really rises to the top for me is it seems like a meaningful way to recognize the sovereignty of the Abenaki and enhance their capacity to care for Native citizens and to engage with state government. So I'll end there and happy to answer any questions you might have on the bill.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you. You mentioned the eugenics apology of last biennium. And I wondered whether, because in the eugenics apology and the subsequent, or specifically in the eugenics apology, the Native American community was expanded to include not simply recognized tribes. I wondered whether the excuse me, the new powers granted to the commission would also include those members of, or Native Americans who are not members of the officially recognized tribes, and whether specifically facilitating communication across the community.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important piece. So right now, the VCNAA is structured to support Native Vermonter or Native American Vermonters, regardless of whether they're recognized tribes or not. So my understanding of the current commissioners who are appointed by the governor is that membership includes folks from recognized tribes and non-recognized tribes. And so that kind of construct for being a space to advocate for Native issues, I think already exists. What we miss or lack is often the capacity to robustly, facilitate outside of the meetings that work. And so this I see as and I think we explicitly included in the powers of the VCNAA, the addition there, facilitating communication across the community of Native Americans in Vermont, that with the VCNAA being structured to support recognized and non-recognized.
But it doesn't say that specifically in the bill, does it?
I believe that the current statute around the VCNAA is not focused only on recognized tribes.
Okay.
And this would add to the powers facilitating communication across Native Americans as part of what having a new staff person could allow for more of. So I think this is an important way to help foster dialogue across recognized and non-recognized
Good
citizens.
Can you tell me, sorry.
Yep.
Can you tell me now, from what is in statute that you just described, there being both recognized and members of non-recognized tribes. Can you tell me whether that is, whether that is true practice?
I think what I might recommend, because I don't want to speak for folks from either the recognized and non-recognized tribes community, and if this is a bill that you take up, that you invite folks who are a part of the commission now, who have been a part of the commission in the past, who have not at all been a part of the commission, to really weigh in on, is this the right place to hold the conversation? Are all folks feeling heard and seen? And how can we enhance dialogue and communication across all of them? I think, again, the more we can invest in capacity to hold these conversations and expertise and facilitation, we all benefit from it.
Thank you. I totally agree with that.
So, Representative Sims, when you were listing the charge of the commission, that sounded like about 8 full-time positions. And notice that the way it's delineated at the end of the bill, it's $100 per diem for up to a maximum of $1,000 per commissioner. So less than one meeting a month.
I think in statute, they are provided per diems for up to 8 meetings a year. So there is already a limit on the number of meetings, which again is something that if you all took this up, you could look at as a part of that underlying statute.
So this does doubles the per diem, but still they're limited by existing statute.
Yeah, and I know that, separately GovOps is looking at a broader study committee on boards and commissions. And I believe the chair of the VCNA, Rachel Shu, did testify, sort of highlighting some of the structural issues around per diems. I think the hope is that bill includes a study to look broadly at boards and commissions, recognizing that maybe the current structure isn't allowing for, all who might want to be compensated for their time to participate in boards. So that's sort of a broader issue, but maybe in the meantime, can we do a little something here to honor the investment in time that folks are making to participate? And then, so the bill includes $150,000 appropriation, $100,000, which will go to that full-time staff person, $41,000 to educational initiatives, which could include reports or studies or, publishing information to inform the public or educate the public about Vermont Native American affairs, and then up to $1,000 to increase the per diems associated with the commission. And yeah, very modest given all the things that we're asking, but kind of start somewhere.
Excuse me.
Are there other questions, comments, concerns? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next bill we'll be looking at is H 333, joined by Representative O'Brien. Please take the chair.
336.
336, sorry. Took my glasses off just a moment.
Can we do a,
Yes.
I don't know if we've met yet.
Okay, yes, I realized halfway through that I didn't do that but we'll go around the table, introduce ourselves. Representative Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Middletown Springs.
Saudia Lamont, Lamoille, Washington District.
Joe Parsons, Newberry, Groton, and Thompson.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, Georgia.
Caleb Elder, Starksboro.
Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1.
Larry Labor, Essex, Orleans, District 1.
Mary Howard, Rutland District 6.
And thank you for joining us. You are?
Representative O'Brien, Tunbridge and Royalton. Windsor, Orange 1. So Representative Labor, what towns were you?
12 of them. You want to?
Oh my gosh, I did.
And I have 5, so.
Yeah,
I live in Morgan.
that's great.
So please,
Are you doing a bunch of bill introductions today?
yes.
Well, for the record, Representative John O'Brien, Royalton and Tunbridge, that's Windsor Orange 1. This bill, H 336, is an identical bill to one I introduced last year, which I introduced, and that's as far as it got. But I think this committee with housing in the title, I think that takes a lot of your time. So I am completely understanding that a bunch of bills that probably get introduced here, it takes a while for them to gain some traction. And I felt this bill was important, and so I introduced it again.
And we appreciate you bringing it forward.
Thank you. It's a bill that I think is deserving of conversation, specifically.
Excuse me.
It says the actual copy. This bill proposes to provide the Abenaki people of Vermont with access to state lands to engage in agricultural, hunting, fishing, trapping, and cultural activities, and for cultural, religious, and spiritual purposes. So my narrative of how I thought this would be a good idea was that on some, back in the days of COVID, on some giant, Zoom tile, meeting, Chief Don Stevens of the Mulhegan Abenaki started talking about farming and how his tribe had really no access to farmland. They didn't own farmland and they wanted to farm. That's all right. And I never really thought about that tribes and agriculture. I mean, you think more hunting, fishing, trapping, but agriculture is important to them, and historically and even now. So rather than maybe get to a point where or push this issue all to the Vermont Land Access and Opportunity Board, I thought, well, the state lands of Vermont are owned by all of us, shared by all of us. We have access to most of them. And so why not make those lands accessible to the Abenaki? I mean, I came at it from agriculture because I'm on the House Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee. And then in discussions with Damian Leonard from Legislative Council, we thought, well, let's add that other piece of it, the hunting, trapping, fishing, which I think is included already in a lot of, I think, Fish and Wildlife, Forest Parks and Rec. But then other things, cultural and religious access to, perhaps. So the bill itself, crucial line, I says that in appropriate situations, that I think the agencies which manage state lands like Forest Parks and Rec or BGS or Agency of Transportation, or there are probably some others, and the tribes could engage in conversation and at least get this discussion going on how would this work. You know, if there's 50 acres of beautiful river bottom land that it's a state park or a state forest, how would Abenakis who want to grow crops there, how would that work? Or if there's, you know, a mountaintop that has certain cultural or religious importance to a tribe and they would like to use it during a certain time of the year, how would that work? So it's really a bill about starting that discussion. And this committee seems like a good place to start the vetting and get the stakeholders in to talk about this. I don't know where it will go, but Representative Donahue was like, last year she said, this isn't probably going to go anywhere, but it's really important to start this discussion. So bipartisan sponsors. And I think it does align with, I looked up the Vermont Land Access and Opportunity Board's mission, which says there's created the Vermont Land Access and Opportunity Board to promote improvements in access to woodlands, farmland, land and home ownership for Vermonters from historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities who continue to face barriers to land and home ownership. So while that's being worked on, this seems like it could be a parallel mission.
My first reaction reading this was beginning to realize how little I know about what lands the state owns, variety, and current allowed uses and restrictions. So it's opening up that discussion.
Yeah.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about the spiritual and religious uses that you mentioned in here?
Right. We included that in the bill, but I feel somewhat ignorant about, you know, I haven't polled the tribes and asked them, you know, what potentially, you know, would those uses be, or if they're really geographically specific to certain state lands. And so, I mean, I know most bills that move in this building, you know, take a while to sort of round up allies and get interested and pushing them. And so I feel like if this bill, doesn't get talked about in this committee this year, this summer I will use to start that conversation sort of offline. Because I have a lot to learn about it, for sure.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. I can't seem to open the website that contains all of the bills, so I can't. Thank you. Just wondering if it laid out who the stakeholders, if it defined who the stakeholders are.
I think does it say recognized tribes in Vermont? And the agencies that manage the state lands?
So I was wondering if, thank you. What about the tribes that are not recognized by the state?
I mean, I think there would be a possibility they could be included in this too.
And the other thing is, I have heard from a couple of different people that can you explain whether there is any involvement in this as a stakeholder or in discussions surrounding this with Vermont Land Trust?
So I just found out because there was I guess we could call it an at-risk dairy farm in Tunbridge that went out of business. And the land trust bought it, and now a sort of community farm with different farmers is trying to buy it from the land trust. But part of the farm, because I think it was probably 300 acres, part of it's going to be a solar installation, and another part has specific access to tribes. And I didn't realize the land trust was moving into this area, so I asked them what kind of access, and it seemed more sort of consistent with Fish and Wildlife as far as giving permission to the tribes to hunt and fish there. But I doubt farming or cultural activities were included in that. So it'd be nice to have the land trust in if they could maybe even go further with this with conserved land, because we're talking a lot about that in our committee, about that 30 by 30 bill.
Right.
And see if they could align themselves with the agencies.
Thank you. Those are my two questions.
I mean, one other thing, last year I spoke to, since we had him in a lot, former commissioner, Forest Parks and Recs Commissioner Michael Snyder was very interested to start this conversation too. And I don't know, there's an interim commissioner now, Danielle Fitzco, and maybe it'll take until they finally have a full-time commissioner back before this, but you're right, as far as, I don't even know how many agencies sort of manage Vermont lands.
I would think there would have to be things like public notification or public education, or having there be a kind of broad greater good involved somewhere in there, that which would be pretty easy to do. But I'm saying that as a legislator, not as a person who's having to execute it. Thank you.
So one of the things that strikes me about this is just the different hunting and fishing is a transitory intermittent use of land as opposed to farming.
Right. Which is seasonal, right, mostly.
Seasonal, but it's a persistent use of the land.
Right. And sugaring, right, could be, certainly is historically a Abenaki.
So there's just a lot of different aspects.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, that brings up the point also of I know the tribes have a hard time speaking as one all the time. And so, but potentially then, individual tribes or non-recognized tribes might be able to negotiate with the various agencies. So it wouldn't have to be a unanimous or a consensus decision. So that might help too, since the tribes are mostly, sort of based in certain parts of Vermont. So the Northeast Kingdom, for example, probably has, lots of state forest land that it could be used.
I just wanted to echo on Elizabeth, Representative Burrow's question. So it doesn't specify, it doesn't even say recognized tribes, it just says Abenaki peoples of Vermont. So it's very general.
Okay.
It doesn't even say state recognized, so
Well, if we were to take it up, we could
yeah,
easily.
so it's fine.
Other comments or questions for Representative O'Brien? Representative Parsons?
Just more of a comment, I guess, to talk about with this, that a few years ago, probably 5, because time goes so quick now, when Newbury acquired their town forest, it was with the help of the Vermont Land Trust.
Yep.
And they certainly push for you to create your own use plan for the property, and they kind of have a chart of things that they'd like you to see in there. And they certainly, while it's not, as this does, prescribe it to one group of people, we have use, we just barely passed the new usage for if somebody wanted to use it for basically all of these purposes except for the farming agricultural type of thing. That's probably more of a permanent type of thing. But yeah, uses for all kinds of things. And but it's just to everybody.
Right.
So
How big's your forest?
636 acres.
Big, yeah. So that'd be interesting.
Basically a mountain. Big chunk of a mountain, yeah.
Yeah. But it'd be interesting to talk about how municipal forests, for example, or municipally owned land might fit into this vision too. At some point, if municipalities had.
Yeah, there's
Say it.
certainly uses, and it's, like I said, most of these are it's just open to everybody.
Right.
Any other further comments, questions? I think it's a great conversation to be trying to get your start.
Yeah, and I'll work more on it, and if I hear anything, I'll be in touch with the committee.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next bill is
Thank you.
It's me.
463, Elizabeth Burrows. And I just want to say, so after that, we have 3 other bills. So after Representative Burrows, why don't we just take a 5-minute break, stretch our legs, and then come back and hear the other 3.
Oh, excuse me. Chair just went down unexpectedly.
Thank you. Should we go around the table or do you?
For the record, I am Representative Elizabeth Burrows, representing the towns of Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor, also known as Windsor 1 district. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
When one thinks about, I'm going to take this off so you can properly hear me. When one thinks about what brought the 1990 Americans with Disabilities, excuse me, when one thinks about what brought the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act about, one must think about life before the ADA, and indeed life that remains the same in many of our towns and cities today, where people with disabilities were literally out of both sight and mind of the American public, and as such, unable to participate in laws that affected them. A portion of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act banned for the first time, excuse me, discrimination on the basis of disability by recipients of federal funds. It was modeled after previous laws which banned race, ethnic origin, and sex-based discrimination by federal fund recipients. But it wasn't until 1990, with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, that accommodations started to be introduced. Today, public entities that have 50 or more employees are required to have a grievance procedure and to designate at least one responsible employee to coordinate ADA compliance. Although the law does not require them to use the term ADA coordinator, it is commonly used by state and local governments across the country. The ADA coordinator's role is to coordinate the government entity's efforts to comply with the ADA and investigate any complaints that the entity has violated the ADA. The coordinator serves as the point of contact for individuals with disabilities to request auxiliary aids and services, policy modifications, and other accommodations, or to file a complaint with the entity. For the general public to address ADA concerns, and often for other departments and employees of the public entity. The name, office, address, and telephone number of the ADA coordinator must be provided to all interested persons. That was taken straight from the ADA Basics Practices toolkit, for state and local government, which has a chapter dedicated to ADA coordinators. It describes the following benefit of having an ADA coordinator. There are many benefits to having a knowledgeable ADA coordinator, even for smaller public entities that are not required to have one. For members of the public, having an ADA coordinator makes it easy to identify someone to help them with questions and concerns about disability discrimination. For example, the ADA coordinator is often the main contact when someone wishes to request an auxiliary aid or service for effective communication, such as sign language interpreter or documents in Braille. A knowledgeable ADA coordinator will be able to efficiently assist people with disabilities with their questions. She or he will also be responsible for investigating complaints. Having an ADA coordinator also benefits state and local government entities. It provides a specific contact person with knowledge and information about the ADA so that questions by staff can be answered efficiently and consistently. In addition, she or he coordinates compliance measures and can be instrumental in ensuring compliance plans move forward. ADA coordinators can take the lead in auditing their state or local government's programs, policies, activities, services, and facilities for ADA compliance. It also describes the following qualifications that help an ADA coordinator to be effective. Familiarity with state or local government's structures, activities, and employees, knowledge of the ADA and other laws addressing the rights of people with disabilities, such as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, experience with people with a broad range of disabilities, knowledge of various alternative formats and alternative technologies that enable people with disabilities to communicate, participate, and perform tasks. The ability to work cooperatively with local government and people with disabilities. Familiarity with any local disability advocacy groups or other disability groups. Skills and training in negotiation and mediation. Organizational and analytical skills. As noted in the regulations above, a coordinator is responsible for investigating any complaints that the governmental entity has violated the ADA. At present, the General Assembly does not have such a procedure and does not identify a coordinator that members of the public can contact if they have complaints regarding the General Assembly's compliance with the requirements of the ADA. H463 seeks to square the absence of this needed set of services. It creates a full-time ADA coordinator position within the General Assembly who would oversee the provision of reasonable accommodations to General Assembly staff and to members of the public who visit the State House and other legislative buildings. The coordinator would also be responsible for working with relevant parties to plan and oversee accessibility related improvements to the State House, develop and implement practices, procedures to improve the access to the State House and other legislative buildings and legislative activities, and to provide much needed training to the General Assembly staff related to accessibility and the provision of reasonable accommodations. This bill appropriates $150,000 for 2024 for personal services related to the coordinator position and for expenses related to providing reasonable accommodations. Accommodations in this sense will mean employees and by default legislators, since we as legislators are not actually covered by the ADA. And for people visiting the State House for legislative purposes, like to act as witnesses. We heard Mike Farrant in our first week here state flatly that there is no budget for accommodations whatsoever. Further, the State House complex is undergoing construction changes beginning this summer. If we're going to try to provide physical accommodations for guests, employees, and legislators, now is a great time to do that.
Representative Krasnow.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your work on this, and it is so badly needed. And just yesterday, I had a constituent reach out asking about finding some different services and things for his wife in South Burlington, and wanted to ask about how to file a complaint against a business and just navigate. And fortunately, and I've shared with you, my mom worked in this field for 45 years, so I was able to help them navigate. And we've talked about this too, the fact that we have a government, people who can't, we want a government that only works for some is unacceptable, and people can't serve and come here. It's just unacceptable to me. So I just can't thank you enough for your work on this, and I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Other comments, Representative Lamont?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for putting this forward. I sincerely appreciate it as a person with disabilities. And also, it was really interesting enough because we had that shared experience the night we had the housing meeting. And for those who don't know, I'll share what happened, if that's okay, because it was really telling. And so the night we had our joint housing meeting in the pavilion, everyone left after the meeting. And you know who was left behind? The two people with mobility issues. And our cars were on the opposite side of the building. Our badges didn't work to get us in so we could walk through the building to get to them. And we had to walk around the State House on the front where it was not straight sidewalks.
And it was icy.
And it was icy. And it was a person with a cane and a person with a walker. And everyone else was gone. Not only was that scary, but it was just not okay. And so when we talk about this work as legislators, we are here to create laws and systems that meet the needs of Vermonters. Legislators are Vermonters too. And the people who come to testify and participate in the legislative process should be able to have safe access to do so. And so thank you so much for bringing this forward. And I hope we get to do some work on this because we need to do better for all of Vermonters who come to participate in this process, not just us.
I have to just call out the name of John Kalaki for bringing this, pushing as hard as he did in the last few years to bring this forward. But it is shocking to me that this doesn't already exist in our state. It's egregious.
Representative Howard.
I just want to comment, thank you for bringing this forward. And I'm very sorry that that happened to the both of you that night. That's just, it's appalling. It's shameful. And I served with John Kalaki. And I know how long he struggled and how he really tried to make a difference and to make people aware of his situation and yours. And what are we waiting for? Someone to fall and get hurt? I know there was an issue.
People fall and get hurt all the time.
I know.
I mean, one of our colleagues falls in the parking lot all the time. And that person waits to leave the building until late because they are embarrassed by falling, but they fall. Our parking lot is so treacherous that they fall all the time.
An issue that former Representative Kalaki brought up is one time we had guests and they were on the House floor and they were told they couldn't sit in the Senate seats. And these were students, young students. And there was a young boy in a wheelchair. And they had the students go upstairs to the balcony. Well, this young boy couldn't go. And I have never seen Representative Kalaki so angry.
He sent me, for this introduction today, he sent me quite a few remarks that I'd be glad to share with our committee. I figured I would share them with you all anyway, after, if we should take up this bill. But yeah, there's story after story after story. Yes. Or the gentleman the other day on Disability Awareness Day who was using a wheelchair and told by the doorman that there's no place for you. His former legislator told by the doorman, there's no place for you here. Which I told the clerk about, and she, went and told him, of course, there's a place for you here, but the damage was already done.
Right.
I mean,
Right. Wow. I don't think it should be if we take it up. I think we should take it up. And I think it's long overdue. So, thank you.
Thank you, and I would like to echo the apology, Representative Howard's apology. That hearing, it's an excuse, not a reason to say we don't know and what we don't know. But thank you for helping us learn. Any other comments?
I hope we take this up.
I think this is an appropriate time to take a break for a few minutes.
thank you very much for